Robert Fisk's bombshell first-hand account for the UK Independent runs contrary to nearly every claim circulating in major international press concerning what happened just over a week ago on April 7 in an embattled suburb outside Damascus. Not only has the veteran British journalist found no evidence of a mass chemical attack, but he's encountered multiple local eyewitnesses who experienced the chaos of that night, but who say the gas attack never happened. Fisk is the first Western journalist to reach and report from the site of the alleged chemical weapons attack widely blamed on Assad's forces. Writing from Douma in eastern Ghouta, Fisk has interviewed a Syrian doctor who works at the hospital shown in one of the well-known videos which purports to depict victims of a chemical attack. The Independent Middle East correspondent Robert Fisk in one of the miles of tunnels hacked beneath Douma by prisoners of Syrian rebels. Source: Yara Ismail via The Independent. Importantly, the report, published late in the day Monday, is causing a stir among mainstream journalists 2 minutes after the Saudi-sponsored jihadist group Jaish al-Islam, Army of Islam, accused the Syrian army of gassing civilians, began and critically promoting the Assad gassed his own people narrative as an already cemented and proven fact based on the mere word and notoriously brutal armed group who itself has admitted to using chemical weapons on the Syrian battlefield in prior years. Also notable is that no journalist or international observer was anywhere near Douma when the purported chemical attack took place. Controversy ensued immediately after Fisk's report, especially as he is among the most recognizable names in the past 4 decades of Middle East war reporting, having twice won the British Press Awards Journalist of the Year prize and as 7-time winner of the British Press Awards Foreign Correspondent of the Year. The NY Times has referred to him as probably the most famous foreign correspondent in Britain, while The Guardian has called him one of the most famous journalists in the world. An Arabic speaker, Fisk became famous for being among the few reporters in history to conduct face-to-face interviews with Osama bin Laden, which he did on 3 occasions between 1993 and 1997. Fisk says he was able to walk around and investigate newly liberated Douma without Syrian government or Russian minders. In part this is likely because he has reported from inside Syria going back decades, in war-torn 1982 Hama, for example, and he begins his account as follows. This is the story of a town called Douma, a ravaged, stinking place of smashed apartment blocks and of an underground clinic whose images of suffering allowed 3 of the Western world's most powerful nations to bomb Syria last week. There's even a friendly doctor in a green coat who, when I track him down in the very same clinic, cheerfully tells me that the gas videotape which horrified the world despite all the doubters is perfectly genuine. War stories, however, have a habit of growing darker. For the same 58-year-old senior Syrian doctor then adds something profoundly uncomfortable. The patients, he says, were overcome not by gas but by oxygen starvation in the rubbish-filled tunnels and basements in which they lived, on a night of wind and heavy shelling that stirred up a dust storm. Fisk goes on to identify the doctor by name, Dr. Asim Rahibani, which is notable given the fact that all early reporting from Douma typically relied on unnamed doctors and anonymous opposition sources for early claims of a chlorine gas attack, lately morphed into an unverified, mixed, chlorine and sarin attack. The doctor's testimony is consistent with that of the well-known Syrian opposition group Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, SOR, which initially reported based on its own pro-rebel sourcing that heavy government bombardment of Douma city resulted in the collapse of homes and underground shelters, causing civilians in hiding to suffocate. According to SOR, which has long been a key go-to source for mainstream media over the course of the war, 70 of them, women and children, have suffered suffocation as a result of the demolition of home basements over them due to the heavy and intense shelling, though outlets from The Guardian to The Washington Post to The New York Times have quoted SOR on a near-daily basis throughout the past 6 years of war. The anti-Assad opposition outlets' reporting of mass asphyxiation due to collapse of shelters has been notably absent from the same publications. Fisk to Spirit Radio, the video is real, but they are not suffering from gas poisoning. Fisk details the Syrian doctor's testimony, who is adamant in his emphasis that civilians were suffocating en masse, and were not gassed. It was a short walk to Dr. Rahibani from the door of his subterranean clinic. 200, it is called. In the weird geology of this partly underground city is a corridor leading downhill where he showed me his lowly hospital and the few beds where a small girl was crying as nurses treated a cut above her eye. I was with my family in the basement of my home 300 meters from here on the night, but all the doctors know what happened. There was a lot of shelling by government forces, and aircraft were always over Douma at night, but on this night, there was wind and huge dust clouds began to come into the basements and cellars where people lived. People began to arrive here suffering from hypoxia, oxygen loss, Then someone at the door, a white helmet, shouted, "Gas," and a panic began. People started throwing water over each other. Yes, the video was filmed here, it is genuine, but what you see are people suffering from hypoxia, not gas poisoning. In addition to interviewing a doctor while standing in the very hospital featured in white helmets footage of the events, Fisk cites the testimonies of multiple locals in the following. Before we go any further, readers should be aware that this is not the only story in Doma. There are the many people I talked to amid the ruins of the town who said they had never believed in gas stories which were usually put about, they claimed, by the armed Islamist groups. These particular jihadis survived under a blizzard of shellfire by living in others people's homes and in vast, wide tunnels with underground roads carved through the living rock by prisoners with pickaxes on 3 levels beneath the town. I walked through 3 of them yesterday, vast corridors of living rock which still contained Russian rockets and burned-out cars. And further fascinating is that the veteran British war correspondent comes upon local Doma residents who have so long been trapped in an isolated, fog of war, battlefield environment, that they are not even aware of the international importance that the town has played in the U.S. coalition decision to bomb Syria. So the story of Doma is thus not just a story of gas or no gas, as the case may be. It's about thousands of people who did not opt for evacuation from Doma on buses that left last week, alongside the gunmen with whom they had to live like troglodytes for months in order to survive. I walked across this town quite freely yesterday without soldier, policeman or minder to haunt my footsteps, just 2 Syrian friends, a camera and a notebook. I sometimes had to clamber across 20-foot-high ramparts, up and down almost sheer walls of earth. Happy to see foreigners among them, happier still that the siege is finally over. They are mostly smiling, those whose faces you can see, of course, because a surprising number of Doma's women wear full-length black hijab. Oddly, after chatting to more than 20 people, I couldn't find one who showed the slightest interest in Doma's role in bringing about the Western air attacks. 2 actually told me they didn't know about the connection. But it was a strange world I walked into. 2 men, Hussam and Nazir Abu Aisha, said they were unaware how many people had been killed in Doma, although the latter admitted he had a cousin executed by Jaish al-Islam, the Army of Islam, for allegedly being close to the regime. They shrugged when I asked about the 43 people said to have died in the infamous Doma attack. The evidence thriller picked at twitter.com/awikif Bassam at Bassam7, April 16, 2018. Evidence. A video montage of the Pentagon and State Department's awkward attempts to dodge the question of evidence concerning the White Helmets, who have played a dubious role throughout the war while presenting themselves as impartial and neutral rescue workers and filmmakers, though known to operate exclusively in Al-Qaeda and other jihadist-controlled areas of Syria. Fisk reports the following: the White Helmets, the medical first responders already legendary in the West but with some interesting corners to their own story, played a familiar role during the battles. They are partly funded by the British Foreign Office and most of the local offices were staffed by Doma men. I found their wrecked offices not far from Dr. Rahibani's clinic. A gas mask had been left outside a food container with one eyepiece pierced and a pile of dirty military camouflage uniforms lay inside one room. Planted, I asked myself? I doubt it. The place was heaped with capsules, broken medical equipment and files, bedding and mattresses. Of course we must hear their side of the story, but it will not happen here. A woman told us that every member of the White Helmets in Doma abandoned their main headquarters and chose to take the government-organized and Russian-protected buses to the rebel province of Idlib with the armed groups when the final truce was agreed. And Fisk further narrates the strangeness of some of the reporting now happening far outside of Doma, which flatly contradicts the testimonies of civilians still inside Doma that he encounters. How could it be that Doma refugees who had reached camps in Turkey were already describing a gas attack which no one in Doma today seemed to recall? It did occur to me, once I was walking for more than a mile through these wretched prisoner-groin tunnels, that the citizens of Doma lived so isolated from each other for so long that news, in our sense of the word, simply had no meaning to them. Syria doesn't cut it as Jeffersonian democracy, as I cynically like to tell my Arab colleagues, and it is indeed a ruthless dictatorship, but that couldn't cow these people, happy to see foreigners among them, from reacting with a few words of truth. So what were they telling me? They talked about the Islamists under whom they had lived. They talked about how the armed groups had stolen civilian homes to avoid the Syrian government and Russian bombing. The Jaish al-Islam had burned their offices before they left, but the massive buildings inside the security zones they created had almost all been sandwiched to the ground by airstrikes. A Syrian colonel I came across behind one of these buildings asked if I wanted to see how deep the tunnels were. I stopped after well over a mile when he cryptically observed that this tunnel might reach as far as Britain. Ah yes, Ms. May, I remembered, whose airstrikes had been so intimately connected to this place of tunnels and dust and gas. For a prime example of what Fisk references as refugees in Turkey, already describing a gas attack which no one in Doma seemed to recall, CNN aired a segment from one such refugee camp which is absolutely bizarre and stunning in its claims. During the segment, which aired hours after the US-led airstrikes on Damascus, CNN's Arwa Damon began sniffing a 7-year-old Syrian girl's backpack while concluding, I mean there's definitely something that stings, with the implication that empirical proof had been found of government chemical weapons use against the little girl and her family. This CNN report by Arwa Damon is an example of what Western governments and media consider evidence that the Syrian govt used chemical weapons in. In fact, it proves nothing. CNN continues to shamelessly promote jihadist propaganda. She felt as if her entire nerves basically released. This Syrian girl hid her dolls inside a box, telling them, "You're going to suffocate in here, maybe, but at least you might be safe from the bombings." CNN reports from inside a refugee camp in Syria hours after a coordinated US-led airstrike hit the area. https://t.co/fixiflitpic.twitter.com/sfig5zpknm CNN at CNN, April 14, 2018. Though it's unclear what the strange phrasing of "her entire nerves basically released" actually means, CNN's Arwa Damon is ultimately claiming to be able to safely and comfortably handle and sniff a backpack which contains residual sarin and chlorine agents, while simultaneously presenting the backpack as proof of a chemical attack which happened a week prior, to say nothing the clearly unscientific and bogus nature all of the above. Notably, in addition to Fisk's bombshell report filed from Ground Zero of the claimed chemical attack in Doma, cable network One American News has also issued a report from on the ground in the newly liberated town, finding no evidence, in its words, that a chemical attack took place there. OAN investigation finds no evidence of chemical weapon attack in Syria. https://t.co/gr3jkpqwrh via YouTube. One American News. @ON. April 16, 2018. Robert Fisk's report for The Independent and the One American News segment constitute the first major international media reports from the location of the alleged chemical attack, but it will be interesting to see the extent to which international chemical and weapons experts either validate or refute their conclusions once the site is inspected. Meanwhile, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons (OPCW) fact-finding mission (FFM) team arrived in Damascus on Saturday, April 14, after the U.S. led overnight strikes which primarily hit government buildings in the capital.